people need to take or reclaim their health. Unfortunately, most people have handed over their health to the healthcare system. So they're always going to be at the boot of the healthcare system, meaning they're always responding from a retroactive perspective instead of being proactive. And the reason why people are retroactive is because the healthcare system is really a sick care system. It only treats you when you get sick. It doesn't have you come into an annual and then nothing checks out, and they don't give you information on how to continue to stay healthy. And so because they don't do that, you have to do that. You have to first become your own, you have to become your own patient first. And a lot of people aren't doing that because they've given over their health to the healthcare system. Now, it's unfortunate because once you're in the system, you're unfortunately at the mercy of the system. And many of the options that are presented, most people don't want to go down that road. Most people don't want to take chemo and radiation. Most people don't want to have their gallbladders removed. Most people don't want to go through these extremist things. But if you don't do what's necessary beforehand, you can't actually prevent a situation. You can't actually work yourself out of the situation, because most of the time people go into the doctors, they're not telling them, oh, this is some little, benign situation that you can work yourself out of. Most of the time when people show up to the doctor, it's really bad. And so you just don't want to do that. Okay. So become your own patient first. And then I think the third thing I would tell people is that, I mentioned a little bit about it before, being a chemist, being a pharmacist, what I understand both about medication and food is that they both can be very toxic to our bodies. We live in a very polluted and toxic world today. The air is polluted, the water is polluted, the food is definitely polluted today. That's why 90% of the food in the market is on a shelf with an expiration date. Okay, and plenty of preservatives, plenty of pesticides. These are all things that are there to keep the food from dying. So it's like, a mortician at, a funeral home. They put embalming fluid inside of a person who's passed because it maintains the body for a little bit longer. Well, they do the same thing with food. That's why they have all those preservatives and food additives and colorants and thickeners and emulsifiers. All of those things are to keep the texture, the taste, the look, all of those things. But unfortunately, those things will keep the food looking alive, but it won't keep you alive. So it's really important to understand that, just from a conscious perspective is that, because everything is so polluted, so toxic today, so many metals in everything, so many xenoestrogens or fake estrogens inside of plastics and cosmetic and hygienic products. These things create a toxic load in our bodies. And I talk about this in the second chapter of my book, where once you get to a certain toxic threshold, that's when disease starts to creep into our bodies. As long as your body can eliminate toxicity on a consistent level and get rid of the toxicity, your body will be fine. You won't have necessarily in the disease. You may have fatigue. You may have things like headaches. You may have some GI discomfort. But once your body goes beyond that toxic threshold, that's when disease creeps into the body. Okay. And so it then becomes very important to have not only a nutritious lifestyle that is cleansing, but also detoxify yourself as well. So you probably noticed that I have a Herbal Detox, and that's why it's probably the foundation of what I recommend to people, because herbs are capable of pulling things out of the body that plants can't. I mean, regular fruits, vegetables, and nuts and seeds can't. Herbs can pull heavy metals out the body. Herbs can pull things like mucus and acidity out of the body. Herbs also cleanse the body. They also nourish the body, and that's why they're bitter. They're so bitter because there's so many different minerals in them, and minerals are what make plants bitter. So, a lot of us, when we were growing up, our grandmothers would give us these little bitter, horrible tasting remedies. But many of those were herbal remedies, and the reason why they taste so bitter is because they have so many minerals in them. So, the third thing I would say is cleansing and detoxifying yourself would be a great third thing to sort of add to that prescription for yourself, so that you can ensure that not only are you protecting yourself in the case that you do have to go to the hospital, but prevention is just as important. I mean, a cure becomes senseless if you prevent the disease in the first place. Yeah.
Absolutely. Actually, when you mentioned herbs, I was thinking about how I read that you had traveled the world studying with herbalists, shamans, and spiritual gurus. And I wanted to ask you what that meant and what motivated you to do that, and what did you learn?
Well, I lived in Japan for about 4 years, and while I was living there, every weekend I would go to the northern part of the island. There's a whole village of people who live to 100, no disease, eat primarily a plant-based diet, and pretty much die in their sleep. And so after going up there for like almost 4 years, getting all this wisdom from them, in my mind, it just made sense. Okay, I understand that this is a very unique population because even though Okinawa is a very small island, somehow they have the highest number of centenarians, people who live to 100, of any other place in the world. And that's been very consistent for a long time. And so in my mind, I'm thinking there has to be other people like this. And so that's why after I moved away from Japan, I just decided to travel for a while. And I figured I would go places where there were things that were indicators that showed that this is what, people had a similar lifestyle to the people in Okinawa. So, I went to India because Ayurvedic medicine is known there. And so yoga, meditation. So they have to have people there, and they did. And parts of Africa because, there's a whole history of like African medicine as it relates to herbal medicine. So went there, Peru, Honduras, places like this. And everywhere I went, I was essentially looking for the local village healer, meaning not somebody at a hospital or somebody with a white coat or credentials, like somebody who had been passed down information from the previous generation, and they were responsible for treating and healing their village. This is the person that I wanted to sort of seek out and find, because then they could walk me into the jungle or the local forest and show me exactly what they do, how they grow it, how they pick it, how they harvest it, and then how they give it to the patient and why they give it to the patient. And so, I did that for almost 2 years, and then, ended up coming back here. But like, that was probably the most humbling and educational experience I've ever had, because you got to understand when I walk into many of these places, sometimes they know like I'm from like the US and I have like a doctorate and that sort of thing. So, but to walk into a space where like I don't know what they know at all is very humbling to walk into that space and say, hey, I'm just a student. I don't know anything. And so, yeah, man, just, everywhere I went was just being an open book and a clear slate and learning what I could, and then going on to the next place, whether it was about physical healing or spiritual healing or emotional healing, just whatever I could learn, I was willing to sort of be open to.
That's so awesome. You're making me, well, that and the COVID pandemic are making me just want to get on an airplane tomorrow and go anywhere.
Yeah.
Just take me away. But of course, I mean, did you get to, obviously you probably learned a lot, so it'd be hard to ask you to answer that question thoroughly, but are you incorporating any of the things that you learned into how you work with patients? And also, do you have to do any things on the pharmacy side still, as far as, giving out medications and things like that?
Yeah, everything I learned that resonated with me is definitely what I use when I work with people one-on-one. And a lot of what I learned was when I came back here to the US, or even before I left, I was looking into like herbalism programs and nutrition programs. And what was missing was this very integrated approach in terms of incorporating not only nature in the form of like food or herbs, but nature itself, like the process of nature. And that was, for me, what was missing. And so that's really what I learned in those years of like traveling was, like seeing a patient and understanding that their stomach ache wasn't just a stomach ache. It was also part of this, the process or of them abusing their own intuition and their own love of self. And so incorporating that into the healing program, incorporating herbs into the healing program that address emotional issues. And that's another thing that, like I didn't learn here, that while I was out and about and traveling and learning, was the importance of using certain herbs to do that. Because most people think that emotional healing can only be learned through therapy, but there's also herbs that are good for that as well, to actually help with that process. So
Amazing. Anything we can readily get?
things like sage, like people know about sage in terms of like burning it inside of the house, but they don't also know that like sage is something that can be incorporated as an herb, especially if you have like emotions that are sitting in the seat of your gut, things like that. I haven't worked in a pharmacy in a few years. This is pretty much what I do, nonstop. It was very difficult for me to work in the pharmacy, but it was also rewarding in the sense that I felt like I was a rebel at the hospital. Like I was the one who could still secretly educate people. The unfortunate thing is like people are going to end up at the hospital. And quite often the people who end up there, they will never hear anything about me because they're never going to search for a guy who's selling plants and herbs. Like a lot of people it doesn't trigger them to like think that way. And so like the hospital was a great middle ground for me to be able to sort of talk to people and guide them along this path out of the hospital. But I haven't worked in the industry for a couple of years now.